أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته قائلون ولا يحصي نعماؤه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتحدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين صاحب العصر والزمان خليفة الرحمن إمام الإنس والجان ولعن الله أعداهم أجمعين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل عسى أن يهديني ربي لأقرب من هذا رشدا صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. First of all, I send my condolences to the Imam of our time, the Maraje, and all of you, my respective sisters and brothers at the Imam Hassan Center in Sydney, on the shahadat of Bibi Zaynab salamullah alayha. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that tawfiq and inspire us to really to understand her life and then attempt to emulate it. You know, growing up in Toronto, I used to think to myself that the Shia calendar has so many dates on it. I mean, there's so many events, there's shahadats, there's wiladats, there's jashns, there's majlises. You have 2 months of Muharram, you have a month of the month of Ramadan, you have all sorts of other events. I would think that it would be a little bit excessive. Okay, this is me now growing up. I know a lot of my guys here in Sydney right now listen to me. Do you guys feel the exact same way? It's a little bit excessive. Why the need to, have so many events on the calendar? Why must we celebrate the birth and commemorate the death of these individuals? And while there are many reasons to do that, one reason that kind of snuck up on me, okay, was the idea that we get a chance to talk about these people. Like we have a chance to dedicate one specific lecture of 35, 40 minutes, not very long. An episode on Netflix is, I think, about that long. But to dedicate that one discussion on this one great personality. I mean, really, if you look at the individuals that we remember and commemorate and celebrate throughout the year on the Islamic calendar, these are the cream of the crop, right? These are the best creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are the best of their nations. And this specific commemoration of Bibi Zaynab's, to me, is so important because, she's one of those heroes of Islam, of Karbala, that I think, we really need to spend a lot of time on. When I say we, I mean individually. To stop and to ponder and to think a little bit about how many versions of herself, how many dimensions of her inner being, how many different levels of her creation we were shown in the event of Karbala itself. Let me go through a little bit of them. These are things that you've heard, but you've heard them under an environment of grief. I'm asking you all tonight, and even though, of course, it is a majlis and, we're wearing black and we're here to kind of commemorate the Shahadat and we'll get to her Masaib, but let's look at things that we've heard of almost every single year in a different dimension, and then you'll see exactly where I'm going towards. I have a certain theme in mind. I want to get to that theme. I have to do a little bit of intro to get to that theme. Bear with me. But, I've kind of learned to really truly appreciate her as somebody who the Deen and Islam owes a lot to. A lot to. So first of all, some basics, right? I mean, you look at her various dimensions. How she was when she left Medina to go towards Karbala. And there are certain communities that, recognize that date, the 28th of Rajab, in a matter of, almost 2 weeks now. The moment that she arrived in Karbala on the 2nd of Muharram, her state now, what version of her. Think about now what you've heard, how she left Medina, how she arrived in Karbala, and then you think about, for example, the day of Ashura. You think about her reaction to certain shuhada coming back to the khayma. Every time that they would call out Imam Hussein for help, he would go running, bring the body back to the tent area. What was Bibi Zainab's reaction to that, right? And then, the day of Ashura, and slowly but surely leading towards that very, very fateful moment of the death of Imam Hussein and her role in that. Okay, compare that now to when she arrived in Karbala. Now, of course, there's huge differences. And then you take her post the day of Ashura. That very night, known as Sham al-Ghriba for many of us, and then the next day. The arrival in Kufa is one. The arrival in Sham is one. The courtyard in Sham is another. And then the return back to Medina. These are all different versions of Zaynab. And it was incredible how she was so in tune with herself, knew herself so well, that she knew what version of herself to apply and to show up and to arrive and to unveil when. Prior to the day of Ashura, she was very quiet. Quiet in the sense of, didn't really see her come out of the tent, wasn't very vocal towards the enemy, didn't really, wasn't really out and about, let's say, for example. She made, for lack of a better word, she played a very domestic role in the sense that she was looking after the women, tending to some wounds, right? Preparing for the battle, looking after the children and the women. And then, as she realized that the men on Imam Hussein's list was getting less and less and less, she realized that she could no longer play that role again, and now she stepped up. Guys, she stepped up. Okay? She mounted her brother on the horse. That itself is difficult. When Imam Hussein was surrounded by thousands of enemies in his very last moments before he left this world, it was her that ran out to Syeda Zaynab A.S, 70 steps away, screaming at Umar ibn Saad, the commander of the army, a man who was a loose cannon. He could have done anything. He watched as infant children were being picked off and killed. There's no stability there. And at a moment now where he has, from morning until now, Asr Ashur, he has now seen blood after blood after blood that has an effect on your heart. Zaynab didn't care. She knew at this moment now for me to stay inside the tent and be quiet wasn't what my responsibility was. So she ran out, stood there, and screamed at Umar ibn Saad, "This is Hussein. Are you really going to watch the grandson of your holy prophet go through this right now?" Because she saw things that even Imam Hussein didn't see. She experienced things on the plains of Karbala that even Imam Hussein didn't experience. Let me explain. Imam Hussein didn't for a single second see the trampling of the bodies of his loved ones. Didn't. He didn't see the cutting of the heads of his loved ones. In fact, one would argue, and some have in history, that when we talk about the Masa'ib of Janab Qasim, the son of Imam Hassan, usually around the 7th of Muharram, we commemorate his shahadat. There's a different atmosphere in which the history describes Imam Hussein's reaction. Him and Hazrat Abbas went roaring into the Maidan of Karbala. With fierceness, with speed, with this fury now, after he heard his nephew call him for help. There were others who called for help, But the sheer speed and the sheer drive by which Imam Hussein was running towards where Qasim called him from, the enemies thought that they were coming to kill them. And that's why you saw the idea that there was chaos at that moment. And so, we oftentimes read the line in Masai that the horses from the right would move to the left to the right, and in between whoever was lying there got trampled, the khak and dirt of Karbala in the air. It was chaos. That's not described for any other shaheed. When Ali Akbar called Imam Hussein, there was a very subdued and a very grief-filled and a very tragic approach to Ali Akbar. But Janabi Qasim, he was fierce, he was running. Why is the question? History says that the qatil of Janabi Qasim, the killer of Janabi Qasim, was about to behead him. And the sheer thought of somebody in his command, under his rule, in his army, being beheaded, that drove Imam Hussein to get on his horse and with immense fierce enter the Maidan al-Karbala. Just the thought of somebody being beheaded. Here, after Asri Ashur, every male shaheed and their head was put on a spear. Who's watching this? Zaynab. They were lined up, as you know, the Masai we recite on Shami Ghiban, and bodies were trampled by multiple horses. Who's seeing this? Zaynab. That's Karbala. She now moves towards Kufa. We sometimes forget about Kufa. We jump to Sham in Syria. No, there's a spot in Kufa in Iraq. There's a stop in there as well, in Ibn Ziyad's palace. Do we understand that there is a vast difference between the two? Her arrival in Kufa, her arrival in Sham. Remember, in her father's 4.5 years of his government, of his Khalifat, his Khilafat al-Zahiri, when he was begged by the Ummah to come and lead us, it only lasted 4.5 years. Even that was riddled with 3 civil wars. But his capital of his government, Imam Ali's, was Kufa. And history tells us that when he wanted to explain something to women, or a group of sisters, or a group of young students who were female, he wouldn't go himself. He would send his daughter Zaynab to go teach them like I would teach them, and she would. And so after a while, there's this immense respect for Zaynab. She was revered. She was seen as a muallima, as a teacher, as a person of knowledge. That same Zaynab now, almost 20 years later, is entering Kufa, a place where she was once revered, once respected, once held in a very high standard, is now entering the bazaar of Kufa, knowing full well these are people who know me and my family, but now she's entering as a captive, as a prisoner, as someone who is apparently made to like she's a guilty criminal. That's hard. Imagine going back to a place where you lived for many, many years, only going back in a very disrespectful manner. We wouldn't be able to do it. And then, of course, she enters Sham. And Sham had no idea who they were, so they were throwing rocks at her. They were hurling all sorts of names at her. And then the final point I want to make in this intro, and then I'll segue into my topic, I promise, was this khutbah, this incredible sermon. Incredible sermon. Okay? Incredible sermon. A sermon that we have to constantly revisit, not just in Muharram, time and time again. Let's examine a little bit of the logistics behind the sermon. She was standing there on a platform in the middle of the courtyard, visible by every angle in that courtyard. That center elevated stage was positioned such that every angle of the courtyard they could see. It was a viewing area. Okay? She was separated from the pack. Imam Sajjad, Kulthum, Fizza, all the women and the kids were pushed aside. Zaynab stood there alone. In front of Yazid, first time seeing him face to face since the day of Ashura. Imagine the emotions now. Picture yourself standing there in front of the person who did what he did to your brother in the most brutalist way. On top of that, oh, by the way, 700 men watching Zaynab. If she crumbled, if she passed out, if she ran, if she couldn't get one word out, she would be completely justified. Instead, what does she do? She somehow finds the strength to deliver a khutbah that had these old, cold-hearted men buried their heads in their hands, weeping like little babies, and the courtyard of Yazid on the verge of absolute implosion. And she did that without any sort of preparation. Look, I've given the example before. I deliver a 40-minute speech right now. I'm talking to you guys in Sydney. 40-minute speech. I spend hours preparing for a simple 40-minute speech. And that preparation is done in a very calm environment. I'm not surrounded by the enemy. I'm not tied up like a prisoner. There wasn't a heat on me. Nothing. Not at all. Right? I'm not surrounded by... I ask my sisters who right now listen to me. My sisters, whether you wear hijab or you don't wear hijab, you stand in front of a room of 100 men. You alone at the podium. There's no other women there, nobody else. You alone by there in front of 100 men, and you deliver a 5-minute speech on whatever you want. I would almost guarantee that a lot of you will be shaking. The thought of it, like, no, thank you. I can barely speak in front of my own men of my family, let alone, And that's after I prepare so much do I deliver this lecture. Nobody told her that, oh, by the way, when we get to the courtyard, you're going to deliver this sermon, so have your thoughts ready. Like usually people tell me on a program, oh, by the way, Milana, you're last. We just want you 5 minutes to wrap it up. The moment they say that, I have about an hour of the program to get my thoughts together for a simple 5-minute speech. This was a long khutbah, a very involved khutbah, a very deep khutbah, and, oh, by the way, on the spot. Pretty incredible. After having taken that journey, after being in prison, bruises and scars, and the trauma of the day of Ashura, the heads of her loved ones are visible, her kids are screaming, her women are widowed, everything. Okay? All this, everything I described as one person. Can you imagine? This is one person. Incredible. And the one thing that she knew in all the different versions that Zaynab showed, the one thing that she knew was she knew how to be composed during difficulty. That's the statement of tonight. Composure during difficulty. Not allowing the moment to get the better of you. Not allowing that emotion to overtake you. Not allowing that hardship, the struggle, the difficulty to turn you into somebody you're not. She never left the path of God. Praising God whenever she could. مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا. I saw nothing but beauty on the day of Ashura. Imagine, Shami Ghariban, the night after her, the night of the day of Ashura, after seeing what she saw, that was one day from Fajr until Dhuhr, where all these men, her loved ones, one by one, her Ona Muhammad, her Ali Akbar, her Abbas, her Hussein, were all killed in that one half of a day. Imagine the heaviness that she has in her heart. Imagine the grief and the sorrow and the pain, all of that. But yet at that night, she read Namaz Shab. Salatul Layl. Imagine now, amongst the burning of tents, amongst the smoke now, she found some crevice or some corner behind the tent when everybody was quiet, and she read her Salatul Layl. I mean, it's incredible. It amazes me. These are our heroes. And it's functions like this. It's events like this, it's days like this of the 15th of Rajab, for example, that give us a simple excuse to talk about these people. In the US, they have holidays, national holidays in the US that are dedicated to a certain individual. For example, in January, just last month, they have Martin Luther King Day in the US. I think it's a Monday, and that Monday is a national holiday. Schools are closed, malls are closed, everything's closed. And it's all in honor of what Dr. King did for the civil rights movement in the 60s in southern U.S. And that day, There's documentaries, there's interviews, there's Netflix specials, there's tweets, there's hashtags, you name it. And that day, Dr. King's remembrance and his value increases. He as a person has increased now, because the more we talk about him, the more his legacy now strengthens. When we stop, for example, in these types of majalis and we talk about Bibi Zaynab and we remember someone like Bibi Zaynab, remember, us remembering Bibi Zaynab doesn't touch her legacy. Her legacy is already where it is. It actually increases our strength and gives and fortifies our faith. Okay, remember that. So every single dimension of hers, every version of her, every level of hers, every side of her, composure during difficulty. Okay? Now, come to the verse. I'm halfway through my speech. Come to the verse. Okay? This verse is from Surah Kahf. Okay? Surah Kahf is a beautiful story, verse number 24. It has a very beautiful dua. The dua in verse number 24, at the last of verse 24, and those of you who are at home or on, at the center, or if you have your apps open, you have a Quran open, please, Surah Kahf is the 18th chapter, verse number 24, the second half of it, where Allah says, the dua that He says is, Asa an yahdi'ani Rabbi li aqraba min hada rashada. Yeah. That maybe my Lord, maybe Rabbi, maybe my Lord will guide me, yahdiyani, will guide me, min hadha rashada, from where I am, rashada, from where I am, they will allow me to grow. Now the first thing, and this is one of my favorite du'as in the Quran, it's very subtle. The du'a is very subtle. There's one thing where we say, oh Allah, increase my risk, Allah, forgive my sins, oh Allah, accept my prayer, make me fast, I don't know, bless my parents. Those are obvious. Those are not so subtle. This is a very subtle dua. Look at what he's asking, okay? He's basically saying that, oh Allah, guide me or bring me closer to you, li aqraba min hadha, from where I am. From where I am. Okay? It's not from where I should be. It's not from where others are. It's not from where my parents want me to be. It's not from where I wish I was. No. The reality is, look, if I'm right now, if you're a 25-year-old youth right now listening to me, and you thought to yourself, oh, at the age of 25, I would do this, I would know that, I would do this. Okay, and at 25, you end up being somewhere that you didn't think you would be. Right? We have that, right? A lot of our healing, this is a little bit of a point in brackets, by the way. A lot of our healing as human beings, and we all need to heal sometimes. We all have our traumas, our triggers, our scars, our wounds. Absolutely. Absolutely. And those who say, no, not me. No, you too, bro. Everybody. Part of the healing process is to grieve over the life that I thought I would have at this age. Okay? There are some people, let's say in my generation, who are in their late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, who thought, you know what, at the age of 40, I would have this many kids, I had this size of a house, I would be in this career, for example, living in this place of the world, blah, blah, blah. Turns out that none of that is true, and you're right now 42 years old. Okay? So none of it is true. You don't have the amount of kids you thought you would have. Maybe you're a single parent, maybe you're struggling, maybe it's a different career path, no idea. But how many times have people said, this is not where I thought I would be at 35? And it pinches a little bit, right? Because we have all these dreams at 18, 19. Oh, no, I'm going to do this, do that, do that. And no, those are great. Don't stop dreaming. But stop and grieve. It's okay to grieve the life that you thought you would have at 40, at 35, at 50. It's okay to grieve. Not to the point where you're ungrateful, God forbid. That if God took you towards another path, let's say, for example, we're not going to sit there and complain to God. We're just going to say, oh, I wonder what would have been if I kept on this path. I wonder what would have been if I actually ended up where I thought I would end up when I was 15 or 16 years old. Take a moment and grieve that moment. Acknowledge that moment It helps you be grateful for what you have right now. This dua talks about reality. It does not talk about some fairy dust world. That, oh, I thought at the age of 35 I would have done my Hajj by now, did my 14 Masumin, blah, 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 this Naziyad, and I thought, okay, it didn't happen. Okay, didn't happen. You're 36 right now, you're 38 right now, and you're nowhere near where you want to be spiritually. And sometimes we play the comparison game, right? In this glamorization era where everything that we do sometimes is plastered on social media, right? My vacations, the birth of my child, my gender reveals, my Hajj trips, my renovations, all these things, right? Birthday surprises, what the husband got me for Valentine's Day, all of it's on social media. Everything is a hashtag nowadays. And people do it because they want to share. That's fine. I'm not trying to bash anybody. I'm just saying that we live in an era of glamorization. So when you see that, you think, oh, okay, next time I renovate my house, I'm going to go here. Next time, for example, we want to reveal the gender, we might think about, for example, this. We end up comparing. And comparison is okay up to a certain point. Sometimes we become so destructive with ourselves that we think, oh my God, that life looks amazing. My life, look around, I have nothing. It's embarrassing. This dua says, Allah, bring me closer, guide me to a point where I'm closer to you from where I am right now. Oh, that's the most important thing. From where I am right now, min hada, verse number 24, from where I am right now. If, for example, I'm at the age of 41 and I still don't know how to read the Quran in Arabic, I'm still alif, ba, ta, tha, or a, u, e, ba, bu. If I'm still doing that, for example, at 41, which is perfectly okay, I have to embrace that and say, look, I didn't get the opportunity to go to Sunday school, go to madrasa, have a Quran teacher, didn't have all that. Now, that doesn't matter. I don't have any shame. There's no retirement age when it comes to learning about Islam. I'm at the age of 42. I'm learning a, u, e, ba, bu, bi. Okay. Da, tu, ti. All right, I am. Allah, I ask you to guide me, to bring me closer to you from where I am, from my alif, ba, ta, not from where I should have been. Let's not play a fantasy world. Let's play a reality world. And God says, look, from wherever you are, I'll bring you closer if you're sincere. Oh, it's so beautiful, guys. I really hope I'm able to get my point across here. This is not about the idea that where you should be, where you are right now. There are people right now in their 60s who are struggling to wake up for Fajr. Okay, that's your battle, Baba. That's your jihad, no problem. There are some sisters who are dying to wear hijab. They can't simply pull the trigger. They're worried about their friends and their family and the size of their nose and, and their coworkers and, and being a hypocrite and valid reasons. And then the dua ends off by this beautiful verb of rashada, rushd. I believe rushd is used in Urdu sometimes. I know it is in Farsi for sure. And of course, it is an Arabic word. Rushd, for a lack of a better translation, is the process of flourishment. Flourishing. Growing is one thing, flourishing is another. Elevating is one thing, flourishing is another. I like the word flourishment. I like the idea of to flourish. Oftentimes in our books, the example used are plants, right? I mean, you see the plants grow, and sometimes plants grow when they have impediments everywhere of growth. Barriers of growth, impeding forces against growth, all those things are there. And yet they still grow. Right? They still grow. And that's what I think the message is from Bibi Zaynab. She flourished under every single circumstance. You ever see, let's say, for example, there's a boulder in someone's front lawn on grass in their garden, right? That big, massive rock is there for landscaping purposes. It's supposed to look good. It looks good. Then sometimes you look carefully, you'll see that from beneath the rock, there is a little bit of grass that's growing up under the rock. Meaning the rock is extremely heavy, the darkness of that soil is there, and yet somehow the grass wanted to fulfill its purpose. The purpose and the kamal and the perfection of grass is what is to grow. Grass grows, that's what it is. The longer the blade, the stronger the blade, the greener the blade, the more perfection that grass has attained. Imagine now having a big boulder sit on top of you, darkness, weight, all the nutrients you need for growth are not there, but somehow you find this one sliver of light, and you find when you wiggle your way into that sliver, and you end up becoming a blade of grass when you're surrounded by this massive, massive boulder. Or sometimes you see flowers crack through the asphalt. It's like, dude, how did you do that, man? That asphalt is heavy. It's hard. To flourish is to grow even though you have no business growing. Oh. Bibi Zaynab had no business being that strong in the Bazaar of Kufa, the Bazaar of Sham, the court of Yazid. No business. She had no business coming all the way back to Karbala, spending 3 days during Arba'in crying for her brother, watering his grave, going back to Medina now, telling everybody, holding Majlis, educating the women on what happened. Oh my God, how much can one person take? All the barriers for her to simply fall over and collapse and just kind of, defeat herself were all there. All of them were there. And she knocked them down one by one. She knocked them down one by one. There was no barrier for her. Us, we saw barriers. There was no barriers for her. She grew and she flourished with every single stage of her life. And that's what I want for all of you. Doesn't matter if you're 65 years old or you're 15 years old. Flourish. Don't grow. Flourish. There are barriers right now surrounding our youth that just want them to be numb, want them to be foolish, want them to be distracted, want them to be, absent-minded, asleep, lullabies, soothe them to sleep, blah, blah, blah. Don't let them think. Don't wake them up. Don't make them logical. And a lot of our youth are falling for it, man. And it's a very difficult society we live in. But I'm asking you as a brother of yours to grow, to flourish. Don't allow the heaviness and the darkness of the rocks of today now stop you from your growth. Your perfection is your growth. Your perfection is your flourishment. And it's your struggle. What a beautiful image for God, for a 17-year-old. To be surrounded by darkness, surrounded by shayateen, army after army of shaitan, and still he finds his way towards Allah. We have a hadith, and I'll move towards Masaib. The hadith says this, from Imam Jafri Sadiq alayhi salatu wasalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajim. He says that when a young individual does sajda in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, prostrates in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah summons the angels. Look at my creation. That creation that you had a lot of issues with, look at him, look at her, in the prime of their youth, surrounded by barrier upon barrier, impediment upon impediment, they put their forehead on dirt, subhana rabbil ala wa bihamdi. That's what? That's rushd. That's flourishment. That's rashada. That's growth. That's removing the impediments. That's as if looking beyond the barriers, as if they don't exist, and trying to find your purpose and fulfilling that purpose to the slightest degree, bit by bit by bit. And a living example of that in history for us is the daughter of Imam Ali. An incredible human being. Not just for our sisters, for everybody. But her laqab of al-Masaib is a heartbreaking one. The mother of musibah, the mother of hardship, the mother of struggles. From the death of her mother, the death of her father, think about what she saw. Think about the Masaiba Fatimiyya, the door slamming itself on her mother Fatima. Think about the poisoned sword of Ibn Muljim on her father's forehead. 3 days she watched her father wither away. Think about the poison that her brother Hassan consumed, throwing up pieces of his internal organs. And think about Asri Ashur. How much can one person take? How much can one heart take? And yet she never left the path, stayed firm, made sure that she took this message from Karbala to Kufa, Kufa to Sham, back to Karbala, back to Medina. All of that with a scarred, wounded heart. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough that she herself now took on these hardships and these struggles. She wanted to make the grief of others light on their shoulders, lighten their grief. Every step of the way she was beside Hussein. Every step of the way she was beside her brother Hussein. On the day of Ashura, he would bring one mayyat after one mayyat, one shaheed after one shaheed, one martyr after one martyr, from the battlefield to the tent, from the battlefield to the tent. And that's very difficult. Can you imagine someone calling out, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, and now he goes running towards that body. It could be Ona Muhammad Qasim, it could be Ali Akbar, it could be anybody. And he would bring that body back. It was emotionally draining for Hussein, but the one to welcome him, the one to stand beside him every single time he brought the shaheed was Zaynab. She would come out of the khayma and say, Bhaiya, don't worry, I'm here. I'll grieve you. Accept my condolences. She would hold him and hug him and dry his tears and let him know that you are doing this for God. Don't remember your mission. Remember your purpose. Don't forget what you're doing this for. She was his backbone. She was his strength. One by one by one. And if that wasn't enough, that one final moment on the plains of Karbala, when Umar bin Saad on the 11th of Muharram, and this is heartbreaking for me, on the 11th of Muharram, now he says, take this caravan from here to Kufa, but make sure that you travel through the battlefield. Let them see the bodies, the beheaded bodies they're leaving behind. And so this qafila now, this caravan led by Bibi Zainab, led by Imam Sajjad, small children, women, orphaned, widows, they're all now moving towards Kufa, going through the Maidan of Karbala, looking at the different bodies of their loved ones and their fathers and their brothers and their nephews, looking at grieving no doubt. And there comes a moment now where the qafila approaches the trampled, beheaded body of the grandson of Rasulullah, the son of Fatima. Imam Sajjad, his son, for the first time, sees this body now, comes off the camel, sits by the head of his father. Oh, Baba, what have they done to you, Baba? What have they done to you, Baba? He begins to cry, he begins to lament, he begins to grieve, and Bibi Zainab knew that if he stayed there too long, something would have happened. He might have passed out, he might get more sick. Zainab now comes off the camel. Sajjad, it's time to go towards Kufa, Sajjad. Come with me towards Kufa, Sajjad. She picks him up. Sajjad, now Imam Sajjad, looking at Bibi Zainab inside of her eyes, tears rolling down his face. Pupi Amma, I will go towards Kufa with you. Answer me one question. Have you ever heard of a son leaving his father unburied without even a coffin on his back, the way I'm leaving my father? سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to accept this qaleel ibadat, inshallah. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to allow us to move from admiration to emulation when it comes to Bibi Zainab's path. We ask you, Allah, give our youth that strength and that inspiration to be a better version of themselves. And finally, Allah, we ask you to hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time and to make us stand beside him when he comes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.